And welcome to The Verdict. Kent Meyers with Mick Cornett joining you again this week with another good show on The Verdict. We try our best to get wonderful guests, and those turn out to be wonderful shows, typically, our viewers tell us. Mick, how are you?
I'm good. Good morning, Kent. Good morning, everyone. And I don't think there's ever been a time in our lives when we've been more conscious about health and health care. So this is going to be a good show, I think.
Yes, the voters of Oklahoma approved Medicaid as an amendment to our Constitution recently, and we are going to have today Patti Davis, a longtime friend of ours here on The Verdict, join us to talk about Oklahoma's expected experience with Medicaid, and we will be back in just a couple of minutes to introduce you once again to Patti Davis of the Oklahoma Hospital Association. With Mick Cornett, you're watching The Verdict.
During my time as Assistant Secretary of the U.S. Department of the Interior, I witnessed a fundamental transformation in the government-to-government relationship between tribes and the United States. It has really been a special time when a lot of past disputes have been addressed. What I hope is that history has turned a corner with Indian tribes. My name's Kevin Washburn, and I'm a professor of law at the University of New Mexico School of Law, and I'm a Chickasaw. I always joke that I don't know why anybody's a tax lawyer, but I know why I'm an Indian law lawyer. The joy of my life is teaching students. It really is a lot of fun teaching young people, sending them out in the world to help take care of their communities. And that's what we try to do. And federal Indian law is a powerful force for that because the law often is on the tribe's side. My Chickasaw lineage comes from my mother's side of the family. She was a very strong, powerful woman. I know she had some rough times, but there's such a tremendous sense of pride now because we have really come a long way since those times. The Chickasaw Nation has always been about helping people to help themselves and help ensure that the community remains strong. And today, it's Chickasaws taking care of Chickasaws. I don't look like a Native American necessarily, but I am a full citizen of the Chickasaw Nation, and I'm very proud of that. The unconquered and unconquerable Chickasaw Nation is part of my bloodstream.
See more stories about the Chickasaw people at profilesofanation.com.
One of the best kept secrets about the post-9/11 GI Bill benefit is that it can be used at a trade school or a technical school, and it doesn't have to be used at a university or college. These are benefits that the veterans have earned through their service, and they should take advantage of it.
Veterans really need to understand that there are many resources offered by the Oklahoma Department of Veteran Affairs. They are there to help you find the right school for you, the school that will help you and your family make great steps into your future.
Welcome back to The Verdict. Kent Meyers with Mick Cornett joining you again this Sunday morning. We really do appreciate you tuning in. Mick, good morning to you.
Good morning, Kent. Looking forward to this show.
Yes. Well, we want to introduce our guest, Patti Davis. Patti is the president of the Oklahoma Hospital Association. She did her undergraduate work at the University of Oklahoma, got her master's in legal studies and healthcare, also from the University of Oklahoma. She has been with the Oklahoma Hospital Association since 1996, but became president in 2018. She has over 20 years experience in hospital administration. And recently, well, actually 2 years in a row, she has been honored by the Journal Record as being one of 50 women making a difference in Oklahoma. She certainly is making a difference in Oklahoma and was very much involved in the effort to try to get Medicaid approved by the voters in Oklahoma, which it did happen. Patti, thank you very much for joining us. Glad to have you.
Thanks for having me back.
Patti, so many big news stories in 2020. The landmark decision by the Oklahoma voters on Medicaid, I don't think got the attention that I thought it would or that it deserved. So refresh our memories, kind of go back what the voters approved and what it means now.
That's a great question. And I think the most overused word in 2020 is unprecedented. 2020, quite truthfully, we knew last fall that Oklahomans, a record number of Oklahomans, over 313,000, signed a petition to let the people vote on whether or not Oklahoma should expand Medicaid. So fast forward, we start a legislative session that gets interrupted because of a pandemic. Session left, they came back. We thought we had an agreement on Medicaid funding that later did not occur. And quite truthfully, then we moved to a ballot on June 30th. And it's important to note, when you talk about all the things that have happened this year, notwithstanding how our lives have been interrupted by COVID, to do a constitutional ballot amendment during that time is nothing short of amazing. And it's important to remember that during early voting, we also in Oklahoma had those sub-Saharan winds with terrible air quality. So it has been an interesting study, and I'm sure it's something that we will certainly want to put down in the history books.
Well, Patti, you mentioned that it was a constitutional amendment. My understanding is that that's rather unique. And why was it a constitutional amendment rather than simply a statutory change?
Well, that is a great question. And when the coalition that the Oklahoma Hospital Association was working with in determining whether or not we should go out and try to collect signatures, we were looking at other states' experience. And every state has different laws governing whether or not these have to be done by amendment, meaning by law, or by constitution. And most recently, we looked at Utah, and their legislature voted to expand Medicaid, then was not well articulated to the public. The public then voted to do it on the ballot and put it in the statute. Once that happened, then the legislature came back and started changing the will of people. So it was a decision that our coalition made, that we know that legislators come and go with term limits. We wanted to protect this so that it would not be undone by legislators later. Important to note that this ability to expand Medicaid has been available for almost a decade, and try as we might, we were not able to get this passed through the legislative session. In 2018, we at least got a bill out of committee, but literally it was just out of frustration that we decided to let the voters decide what to do with Medicaid.
And how will the hospitals be affected?
Well, it's important to note that Oklahoma hospitals are required by federal law under EMTALA, Emergency Treatment and Active Labor Act, to provide care in the emergency room for emergency conditions regardless of ability to pay. Consequently, Oklahoma hospitals experience a very high number of people that do not have access to health care, and unfortunately may use the emergency room for conditions that could have been very well treated in a primary care physician's offices. Routinely, year in and year out, Oklahoma hospitals provide over $500 million of uncompensated care annually. And when we say uncompensated care, it's not care that it's paid for. That means the hospital has to absorb that as part of their cost structure. And then that also goes into the determination of what goods and services cost. Because let's make no mistake, we all want a good healthcare system to be there. And the people that take care of us are well-trained professionals, and we want them well-trained, and we want our hospitals well-equipped with staff and equipment to take care of us.
Well, we're not the first state, of course, to adopt the new Medicaid.
Right.
What's your understanding of the experience other states that have adopted Medicaid have had?
Well, it's all over the board. Early adopters, and I like to think that we have looked around at early adopters and have learned from their mistakes. Whether or not they put enough safeguards in place to make sure that they're making sure only the truly needy that fall into these categories are eligible. We don't want employees that are low income currently to drop their health insurance and then go to the state plan. So Oklahoma was number 37. We were the first to put it in the Constitution, and since then, August 5th, Missouri also passed Medicaid expansion and put it in their Constitution as well. So every state's experience has been a little different, and we like to say we've learned from people that have gone before us.
So will the legislature have new responsibilities in next year's session to try and figure out the funding proportions? And what do you expect them to do? What's the conversation right now?
Oh, I fully expect that the Oklahoma Hospital Association will be very engaged in those conversations. It was important to note that we were engaged in conversations last session regarding funding. There was a funding package put together that the Oklahoma Hospital Association agreed to. Now, you may say, why did we have to agree? Because the hospitals who currently pay into a hospital provider fee agreed to generate more funds for the 10% state share. So we had agreed last year to put $134 million into the funding for Medicaid expansion for the first year. Important to note, since funding for Medicaid has been available since 2014, the first 3 years that would be at 100% state match not required, meaning totally paid for by the federal government. It ratchets down over time to a 90-10 split. And this information is very much in the weeds. But in 2020, for a state that's doing Medicaid expansion, the state has to provide 10% state share. The total estimated cost of that state share for Medicaid expansion is $164 million. On behalf of the hospitals across Oklahoma, they had agreed to fund $134 million of that. So while we didn't ultimately succeed legislatively, there was so much discussion in last session about how to fund this. We fully expect we'll be back in part of that discussion.
What happened to the bill last time?
Mick, excuse me, just a minute. If you don't mind, I'm sorry. I'm kind of keeping the clock today, and we need to take a break. But don't forget that question, because that'll be the first thing we talk about when we come back. With Patti Davis and Mick Cornett, you're watching The Verdict.
OU Law has a history and heritage that are unparalleled. At the University of Oklahoma College of Law, we empower our students to pursue the career of their dreams. We have the highest U.S. News ranking ever achieved by an Oklahoma law school. We are the first law school in the country to launch a college-wide digital initiative. And this year, our competition teams rank number 2 in the nation. OU Law, generations of excellence, limitless possibilities.
The good life comes naturally to Tulsa, where nature's beauty is matched with an eye for aesthetics. A legacy of neighborhoods graced with lawns and landscaping and handsome homes. A place that seems to have patented an ideal lifestyle. Bank First is loyal to the quality of life Tulsa assures its citizens, to the priority placed on education, culture, and growth. Loyal to builders who transform raw land into residential charm. Developers who see opportunity and add vitality to Tulsa's economy. Bank First serves both enterprise and private lives that need a loyal partner. It's how we help nurture this city's very good life. Bank First. Loyal to Oklahoma. Loyal to you.
And welcome back to The Verdict. Kent Meyers and Mick Cornett with our guest Patti Davis, talking about a number of things medical, primarily Medicaid. Mick, I cut you off in midstream, and I apologize for that to get to the break, but would you go ahead with what you were wanting to ask about?
Well, I was just reflecting back to the last session and the attempts to find some sort of compromise prior to the vote, and then all of a sudden it went away, and I was just trying to find out what happened.
Important to note that we, meaning the Oklahoma Hospital Association, our executive committee, were in negotiations with the governor on a funding package. Important to know that the governor put forth a plan called Sooner Care 2.0 that would have expanded Medicaid July 1, 2020. Pandemic, we thought it was important for us to have that conversation because we knew a number of people were suffering in Oklahoma that could benefit from health care. Subsequently, in the waning weeks of the legislature came forth with a Medicaid funding bill that was a little bit different, still $134 million from hospitals. They passed it, and then ultimately the governor vetoed it. So we were very surprised by that.
Okay.
Well, let me ask you this, Patti. What kind of, well, first of all, what is the effective date of the proposition adopted by the people to implement Medicaid?
July 1, 2021. So
a little less than a year from now.
Right. It means the legislature has to come back and decide how they're going to fund Medicaid expansion.
And what when it is finally implemented, what effect will it have on the rural hospitals first, urban hospitals second, if there is any difference?
There is, and I failed to mention before, Oklahoma ranks number 2 behind Texas for the highest number of uninsured. And when you talk about rural versus urban, rural Oklahoma, people that live there typically are older, sicker, and poorer. So as a proportionate share, there are more uninsured individuals in rural Oklahoma. The impact this has on rural hospitals. Since 2016, we've had 6 rural hospitals close. We've also had 8 hospitals go bankrupt. No doubt when hospitals can have a reliable funding source for people in their community with no ability to pay for their care, that is financially beneficial. It helps them pay their staff and buy the equipment they need. How this impacts urban hospitals, we all know when care is not available in the rural areas, and maybe it's because the hospital is closed, or maybe it's because the level of services over time have diminished in the rural areas, that patients that need specialty, subspecialty care will end up in the metropolitan areas, and we know that's very expensive care as well. So this is an economic shot in the arm, both for rural hospitals and urban hospitals, to try to defray some of the cost of uncompensated care that currently exists today.
Patti, if you've looked at the numbers from Election Day, what would jump out at people? What constituencies favored and voted yes, and what parts of the state voted no?
Well, it's important because we all know that it ended up being a very close election, roughly in the 6,000 vote difference range. There were 8 of Oklahoma's 77 counties that voted in favor, and early analysis was that rural Oklahoma voted against their own self-interest. And as we've done a deeper dive in looking at the election results, there's no doubt that in counties where we lost, particularly in counties that had hospitals that were very aggressive in marketing this to their communities, that the loss was pretty close. So had it not been for the really great job that our hospitals did with their local communities, making the case on why this is important for them, this ballot initiative could have been lost totally. So in those rural counties, there were just a good number of those that were very, very close, and we very much appreciate our hospital's efforts on making sure their counties showed up to vote.
And the folks that voted against this proposition, what was the principal argument that they put forth to say vote against this?
Well, it's important to look at this historically and know that in the last 2 weeks of the of the campaign, there was an opposition campaign mounted, and it was very political, and it's about we can't afford this. And quite simply, we can afford this, and we can do it without raising taxes, because any businessman would be more than willing to put $1 on the table if it could be matched for $9. We've got a statewide economic study done by experts that show Oklahoma can afford this and that we will be better off for it. Important to note, we rarely turn down federal dollars in Oklahoma, and we applaud them when it's for building roads or developing our military infrastructure. Healthcare should be no different. This money is available. It's money we send to Washington, D.C., and we should be bringing it back. And Oklahoma's legislative reluctance to do so, we've left over $5 billion in Washington, D.C. that could be spent on healthcare of Oklahomans, which is sorely needed.
Patti, at the end of the day, we know how the state of Oklahoma has performed poorly in healthcare statistics. Is the passage of this initiative going to improve those statistics, or are there additional steps that we're going to need to make to start moving the needle?
Well, certainly this is an investment. And I happen to believe that when people do not have access to primary care and preventive care, that they wait until their condition is so dire that they show up in an emergency room with a very difficult diagnosis or illness that is very, very expensive to treat. So I would like to believe that we will work with our Oklahoma Healthcare Authority and develop strategies encouraging preventive care, so that people that we're going without will do the right thing and do the preventive care. Another thing that we absolutely know is that there is a common misconception in Oklahoma that if you are poor, you qualify for Medicaid. And that's not the case. We are talking, the only people that currently qualify for Medicaid are poor kids, pregnant women, poor, blind, and disabled individuals. So a family of 3 earning under $29,000 a year does not qualify for anything. They get sick, what happens? It may lead to medical bankruptcy. Another thing that we know will be a huge benefit is the fact that we are spending 100% state funding to pay for the care and treatment of many people that have behavioral health issues. When those are left untreated, they end up in jail and ultimately in our criminal justice system. If our state would invest, instead of 100% state funding, would go to get 9-to-1 funding, that we could start addressing these systemic behavioral health issues that are costing Oklahomans a lot in terms of criminal justice.
Well, Patti, that has to be the last word for today, but we appreciate so much you joining us and telling us about the Medicaid proposition and the Oklahoma Hospital Association's involvement in it. We wish you the best of luck, and we stay in touch. We'll have you back if something big develops, but you'll have to tell us that, but you're always welcome. Patti, thank you so much for joining us. And Mick and I will be right back to close the show.
Thank you.
It used to be okay in hospitals. It used to be okay in movie theaters. It was okay in classrooms, restaurants, and airplanes. But thanks to a greater understanding of the dangers, that's not okay anymore. So now that we know secondhand smoke causes lifelong health problems, why is it still okay to smoke with children in the car? Bottom line, it's not okay. Let's get serious about protecting kids. Join the fight at stopswithme.com.
All children deserve a life of hope and love, but sometimes they experience a life of pain, neglect, and abuse.
When that happens, Each child deserves all the quality, assistance, and representation that can be offered in our legal system. For more information, call 23-CHILD.
Oklahoma Lawyers for Children, helping to bring hope and love back to the lives of abused children.
You will always be mom and dad to me.
You have children come from a different lifestyle, different mindset. You have to open your arms and really do what you have to do to have that child become a part of your family. And if it's more patience, that's what you do. Kids got to know they can trust you. And that's what we try to do with these kids.
You will always be mom and dad to me.
The Journal-Record is pleased to be a sponsor of The Verdict. The Journal-Record, since 1903, the best source of Oklahoma business news and legal information.
And welcome back to The Verdict. Kent Meyers and Mick Cornett closing up this show that we just gave to you from with information from Patti Davis, the Oklahoma Hospital Association. Mick, it looks like another exciting time in Oklahoma.
Well, we're always talking about health care in Oklahoma. And let me give some website information. Patti's organization is at okoha.com. That's okoha.com. And we've got a website, as you know, theverdict.tv. So I hope people will log on and talk about guests they'd like to see on a future show.
Yeah, Mick, we have about a minute left before we have to say goodbye. I just think that the voters of Oklahoma did a great job in passing this Medicaid expansion proposition and joining 37 other states that have done the same thing. But it's going to make a difference in places that many of us do not see on a regular basis, in the rural counties and in the pocketbooks and of the rural hospitals and the service provided.
No question. I thought Patti made a good point, though, that we've got to do a better job on wellness. When we make poor health decisions and ultimately we find out we need hospitalization, and some of it is needless expense in the grand scheme of things. So Oklahomans still have some work to do in taking care of themselves. But as a backdrop, it's nice to see additional dollars going into this area.
Yeah, Patti's been such an effective advocate for healthcare for 20 plus years here in Oklahoma. We're very fortunate to have her available. We got to sign off now. We're out of time. For Mick Cornett, this is Kent Meyers. You've been watching The Verdict, and we will see you next week.